This video may contain sexual references, coarse language, math, and jokes about your mum. Viewer discretion is advised. Hey, Raichu, guess what I just got? No, it's not a marker of the dysfunctional status of power, whatever that is. It's a PS5. No, stop guessing, I already told you. We'll do it later! Okay, let's get me some games. 110, 125? That's insane. No!
Right now, there's a bit of a controversy.
Video games are an expensive hobby, but at the same time, games are cheaper and more accessible today than ever before.
AAA games should not cost $60 anymore.
They may need to go up to $70 or $80.
Other forms of entertainment see yearly price increases.
So yeah, I agree with you. I think we're well overdue for a price hike.
Okay, that seems to have gone. I don't know what that was. But why do games need to be more expensive?
Inflation.
Rate of inflation.
Inflation.
Look at inflation.
Okay. I mean, economics isn't really my area of expertise. I have a media degree. But it also didn't seem to stop any of these people, so I might as well have a go, you know. I'll give it my best shot. Alright, time to hit the books. Oh, and by books, I mean Google stuff. I'm not going to actually get physical books. This isn't 1995. I'll be about 3 months. Does that sound fair? Everyone, meet back here, 3 months? Alright.
Many months later.
Let's do this. Okay, so it's been exactly 3 months, and I haven't changed my clothes. Don't think about it too hard. I've definitely showered. As some of you may have noticed, I have done my research. You can see by all of the equations on the board behind me. And if you're particularly eagle-eyed, you might have noticed that I copied them from the board from that Ghostbusters movie. The bad one. You know which one. Is this a boson? Is that a boson? I don't know. Is that? That's pi. I'm going to be throwing out a lot of numbers over the next 53 minutes! And I'm largely going to use US figures because I think a lot of people understand their own situation versus the US, as a lot of industries do tend to be quite US-centric. So what is inflation? It's something we've been hearing more and more about, as it's been exacerbated by a pandemic and a somewhat related supply shortage. Well, it's like this. If you were to buy a pair of Jenko jeans in the 90s for, say, $100, if you were to buy those same pair of jeans today, you would immediately return them for your money back, and therefore it's cheaper. And that is inflation. I mean, kind of, but not really. Maybe one of these guys has a better explanation, like a sound bite of an explanation, like a little chunk of morsel, and we can just move on. Once we've got that, we can move on. I'm sure they've got one. They're part of the gaming community, and there's one thing I know about the gaming community, it's that they know inflation. They know inflation, and they have good opinions about women. Pretty sure. I think I'm right on that one. It doesn't sound right, though. Like, I read it, but it didn't sound right.
On average, goods and services usually cost 1 to 3% more every year. This is very normal, and I'll tell you why. Usually, this happens because we need to increase the prices of all of our shit to either keep up with the money supply that's being printed and sent out into the economy, or to combat increases of wages. If we didn't increase the price of things, then everybody would be rich, and nobody would want to clean toilets in our local KFC, or KFC, as I like to affectionately refer to it as.
Okay, first things first, a little economics 101. Everything is supply and demand curves. Everything. Literally everything. Didn't check, I mostly just watched Ghostbusters. Now, let's start with that money supply thing. We don't have to increase the prices of all our shit, sick, to keep up with the money supply. Is that how that's pronounced? Sick? I wasn't supposed to say that out loud?
Sick. 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 Sick.
Sick. Okay. Is sick rude? Well, I am being unnecessarily petty. Under modern monetary policy, the increase in prices, in other words inflation, is not necessarily controlled by the money supply. Sometimes it does correlate, but not always. Theoretically, you can pump money into an economy without affecting prices at all, as long as it's balanced against employment, both in terms of labor and materials. Increasing the money supply potentially increases demand for investment, and as long as there's sufficient supply of things like labor, raw materials, plant, equipment, and land, there is no inflation. Now, this doesn't mean that money supply can't affect inflation. Often it is used to create inflation. Now, if prices drop across the board, as it can do in a recession, demand will drop as people hunker down, and this can result in overall deflation. Now, deflation means that people will be less likely to buy goods and services as they'll be cheaper tomorrow, and the whole economy grinds to a halt. Now, a government central bank could take advantage of the balance between employment and money supply, and pump more money into the economy than the immediate capacity for employment can sustain, and generate inflation and therefore economic activity. Let me illustrate this with an extreme example. Let's imagine a world where there is maximum employment. That means everyone who's willing and able to work is employed, and all the resources have been allocated. Now, the central bank increases their money supply by essentially buying back debt. In effect, they purchase treasury securities like bills from commercial banks, increasing their reserves and allowing them to lend out money. So, for example, take a company like, I don't know, Mondelez, the company that makes Oreos. And they want to build a new factory in Phoenix, Arizona to make a new product, say Oreo tarts. And because their current factories are too busy making a million different flavors of Oreos, they need a new one. So Mondelez gets a loan. But now they need land, concrete, steel, and builders to build the factory. And then they need grain, sugar, and factory workers to make the product. Also, they need energy to run the factory, and because I randomly picked one of the hottest places in America, they will need a lot of air conditioning. Oops. However, the people they need to employ already have work, and the materials they need are already assigned. So what do? They offer more than other businesses can for the same materials, energy, and labor. This increases the price of everything: concrete, the iron, the grain, the wages of the building industry, and the wages of the factory workers, the electricity costs, and so on, and high inflation results. Now pair this scenario back and you can imagine examples where the interaction between money supply and employment can result in a lower level of inflation. Now let's cover that wages thing. We don't have to increase the prices just so that people will have to work at fast food restaurants cleaning toilets. I mean, if it was up to me, I value that labor quite highly. I salute you, you latrine marines. Commode commandos? Pooper trooper? Come back to me. I'll come up with something. Now, the capitalist system is somewhat designed to keep people in these shitty jobs. Pun unintended. I mean, it was unintended when I wrote shitty jobs, but then I noticed the pun, and so now that I've said it out loud, technically, pun intended. We don't have to combat wages. This isn't some kind of throne war. Prices generally rise when wages rise under one of two main principles: demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. Higher wages means more money to be spent. In a system of limited supply, higher demand means higher prices, so demand pulls inflation. Like a good pickup artist. No, not him either. You know what? I don't think there is one. Higher wages also adds to costs, therefore pushing prices up, like a good bra does. I don't know. I mean, like Gandhi said, the only good bra is no bra. Wait, what? Did that actually happened? I mean, to an extent, there is a cyclic nature to this. Or cyclic, I don't know how to pronounce it. Wages go up, so costs go up, so prices go up, so wages go up to combat inflation, and it keeps going on and on and on until the heat death of the universe, which, seemingly is approaching us. But there's a staggered nature to this. You don't go out to the shops and milk is 10 cents cheaper one week, and so you go to your boss's office and ask for a 10-cent raise. It kind of just slowly happens over time. So not a great explanation for inflation, but I'm a man of second chances. Let's give him another go. He might have something else.
Other forms of entertainment see yearly price increases. Hell, just look at the cost of movies. 10 years ago, you could get into a movie for about $4 at the local theater, and if you were sneaky, you could movie hop when your flick was over to get a twofer. That same movie theater is charging right now 15 smackers to see a movie.
Oh, are we doing one example that proves our point? I could do that. I mean, I can't keep a Tamagotchi alive for more than 3 days, but I can do that. I can't ride a unicycle, but I can do that. I can't your money. We'll deal with the other forms of entertainment in a second, but first of all, the inflation of one item doesn't tell us anything. When we talk about inflation, we mean economy-wide inflation. This kind of inflation is an aggregate. It's the average change in the price of goods and services. What goods and services, you might ask? Well, for that we need to talk about CPI. CPI stands for cost per insertion. Wait, what? It's pretty sexist. Like a nerdy misogyny involving spreadsheets? Spreadsheets. Excel, fuck you. Last time I used Urban Dictionary. CPI is the Consumer Price Index, which is calculated using a sample of goods and services that number in the tens of thousands. These items are grouped into 8 main categories: food and beverages, housing, apparel, transportation, medical care, recreation, education and communication, and other goods and services. Now, some of these goods will inflate more than others. Some may even show no inflation or actually deflate. But when averaged out, we get the Consumer Price Index. Now, this might be a bit of an aside. It'll come back around in a second. The effects of inflation are disproportionately felt by lower income earners. This is because things like groceries, healthcare, energy, gas, i.e. the essentials, are higher inflated items, whereas discretionary spends are lower inflated. And because a higher percentage of lower income wages are spent on essentials, the effective inflation rate will be higher, particularly during recessions. Now, back to those other forms of entertainment. Also, you might have noticed that I have a red mark on my forehead. I don't know if you can see it on the camera. I headbutted a cabinet. I don't know what else to tell you. Entertainment is discretionary. I mean, it is an essential part of the human experience, but when things get tight, it is the first thing to go. So, for the purposes of what we're going to talk about now, entertainment is discretionary spending. Entertainment, by its very nature, and due to the whole economy thing that we got ourselves into, will be lower inflated. And remember back when I said I could do that? I could do that. Yeah, that then is before, and now is the time for this. In the 1980s, VHS copies of movies were priced wildly. Some, like Return of the Jedi, was selling for $80, whereas Sleeping Beauty, with its seasonal promotions, was selling for $29.95. Some studios at the time were even considering raising the prices to $90. But in 1987, Paramount released Top Gun for $26.95 as part of a Faustian contract in which you were forced to watch a Diet Pepsi commercial. Or, unless you were some idiot kid sat in front of a sweaty Tom Cruise, you could fast forward through it. Oh yeah. I could have fast forwarded through it. Paramount's president of their video division, Robert Klingensmith, said back then that the magic price point was $19.95 for consumers. A year later, again with a promotional arrangement with Pepsi, E.T. sold for $19.95, and after 34 years of Walkmans, jelly bracelets, S Club 7's 2 in a Million, did someone get paid to choreograph that? I can do that. Where's my money? Walkmans! Again! Why? Phones are Walkmans. The Spotify is Walkmans. Anyway, the point is, the price of new release movies has barely changed since, with DVDs of the latest blockbusters selling for $19.99. Also, unless you're one of those idiots with a vinyl collection, you're probably paying less per song or album than anyone since the late 80s, and that's not even adjusting for inflation. What? So? Look, I didn't say I wasn't one of those idiots. I said I'd do it later, God! Okay, maybe that wasn't the right show for this. What about this one? This one looks professional. It's got vector graphics, and it's kind of animated. Let's give them a go.
In 1994, it cost around $2.49 to buy a 20-ounce box of Oreo cookies. In 2014, it cost around $4.49 to buy a 14-ounce box of Oreo cookies. Manufacturing one box of Oreo cookies hasn't necessarily gone up, but the rate of inflation has, making a smaller box cost nearly twice as much as a larger box did 20 years prior.
What the fuck are you talking about? Okay, full transparency, when I picked Mondelez back then as a random example, It wasn't random. I knew this was coming. It ties in. Let me try and be charitable. By inflation, they might have meant the decrease in the purchasing power of the currency, and that consumers on the demand side would be willing to spend more alongside general market expectations as a whole. But rarely is the supply-demand equilibrium so one-sided. It's usually an interplay between these forces that dictate prices. In other words, depending on supply and demand, what is the supplier willing to sell it for, and their costs will affect this, and what is the purchaser willing to pay for it? Hey, so I've been working on this video on and off for, I want to say, 5 years. I've put a lot of work into like researching and coming up with ideas for this, and it's been reworked and reworded multiple times, and I still didn't nail it first time. So I've decided to put an addendum in. This is that addendum. So the thing that just happened was I was talking about supply and demand and how it's rarely one-sided. And I think I'm accurate, at least when it comes to video games, which is what this video is about. But when it comes to things like essentials, it's a different story, because the demand, the consumers purchasing essential items like groceries don't have the luxury of not buying if it's too much. And because there's a current supply shortage on literally everything, and some of that is like oil and energy, because of like the war in Ukraine, other things like groceries. Also, there's like, I think grain is another export from Ukraine, rather than the oil from Russia. Grain from Ukraine. That's how I remember it. Anyway, those supply shortages of essential items like that are creating a situation that is very one-sided, very supply-side driven. We're talking a lot about wages in the supply shortage, and it's supply of like resources and materials and things like that, rather than supply of labor. There is that issue as well, but it hasn't heavily resulted in increases in wages. And I want to show a little clip about the current situation and what the breakdown of where the money's going versus like other points in time. What's the average over this time as a percentage of the whole sort of profits? You can watch that now. I'll clip it in, and then I'll talk about it in a second.
According to this chart, what is the biggest driver of inflation during the pandemic? The dark blue is the recent period.
It would be corporate profits.
And what is that percentage?
It is 54%, and that number does stay that level of high if you update that number to more recent numbers as well.
So over half of the increased prices people are paying are coming from increases in corporate profits.
Yes, the unit price index is reflected in corporate profits as opposed to other costs.
And how does that compare to historically, to other periods of inflation or over other periods of economic time?
As reflected there and in other analysis, it is significantly higher in this recovery, 11.5%.
And what is it today?
53%.
So I want to make sure everyone in America understands this chart. What is a unit labor cost?
The cost, wages and an associated work cost.
So we could just wages. What is a non-labor input cost?
A variety of things, including maintenance and investments.
Okay, so I have to buy the stuff to make the widget. I have to have a factory. I have to keep the lights on. I have to hire someone to make the widget. That's this stuff. And this is what I add on top.
So the point was that there is a lot of money going to corporate interests, not being distributed to wages. Wages is becoming a smaller percentage within this supply shortage. As we come out, I wonder if the market will recalibrate. People will require higher wages if prices are maintained at this level. If prices drop, wages won't have to go up, but corporate greed is a thing. But the thing is that that's not what's happening in the infographics show that I'm talking about right now. Oreos isn't, part of a supply shortage that is like crazily out of control, and there's a ton of corporate greed that has resulted in prices going up without a ton of like costs going up, So back to your regularly scheduled programming. Now, the cost of manufacturing a box of Oreos hasn't necessarily gone up. That is true. Probably has, though. If we accept that the cost of manufacturing a box of Oreos hasn't gone up, but the per unit price and sales have gone up, we should see a significant increase in the operating margins of the company making it. Right? Well, I checked. Mondelez and then previously Kraft, they're both publicly traded companies. Their financial information is available online right now. Now, also before, but right now, when you're watching this, doesn't matter when you did, it's available online right now by law. You can look it up. And their operating margins pretty steady. Not massive profits like these guys seem to think, but they're doing alright. Even Mondelez, in their annual reports, state that rising costs are a reason for their higher prices. For example, in 2012, they say, quote, "Our aggregate commodity costs increased primarily as a result of increased packaging, energy, grains, and oil costs. We have addressed higher commodity costs primarily through higher pricing," end quote. Which makes sense, right? So, not a great way to, illustrate inflation. I have no idea. I think there's a good explanation somewhere in there. I think I described it through what it's not, but let's bring this all together. In a world of limited supply, the effects of supply and demand on a market are going to ordinarily result in prices going up on average, and therefore the decrease in purchasing power of a currency. So, there were a lot of reasons I wanted to make this video, but there was an initial impetus. I should probably use his real name. Colin?
As I've demonstrated many times over the years, including a popular, much circulated article back when I was at IGN, gaming is demonstrably and undeniably cheaper than it has ever been. Period. Hardware is cheaper in real, inflation-adjusted money, and so too is software. That simply cannot be contested. So please don't waste your time trying.
Hey look, another cis male sitting behind a desk, talking at length about topics with a visual aid to screen left. I mean, there's a lot. Myers, Oliver, Stewart, Colbert, Elmo. Undeniably. Cannot be contested. Challenge accepted. Bitch. He says that gaming is demonstrably cheaper than it's ever been. And his reasoning for this is something you might awkwardly do on a train if a sexy lady, or man, or MB sits across from you. And that is adjusting for inflation. That was a long walk, and I'm sorry I took you on it. Now, adjusting for inflation is a useful method for getting a feeling of the impact of a purchase in the past by using today's dollar as a touchstone. Long Island IC brings up an article he wrote back in 2013 that he says demonstrates that gaming is cheaper than ever. And I have a few notes. Firstly, Mr. Taxation, I'm going to run out of these, brings up software. In 1990, an NES game cost $50. Adjusting for inflation, that's $89 in 2013. 2013 was the same year as the 8th generation of consoles were released, and games were selling for $60. And now in 2021 dollars, which was all was available when I wrote this, and I refuse to go back and change it, that NES game would cost $106. Compare that to the Xbox Series and PS5 games that are retailing for $70. Another console it brings up is the PS2, which games also retailed for around $50. Now, I have a couple of issues with this. First, wait, I already said firstly. I'm in some sort of nested list now. Maybe one of those A's with the bracket or the little I. A. Bringing up cartridges is a false comparison. Cartridges in the 80s and 90s were a notoriously expensive format. Cartridges were estimated to cost between $6 and $8 to manufacture. Compare that to discs, which are around $1 to $2. And now, past or future me, the version of me that has longer hair will take over. Add to this Nintendo's restrictive licensing policies, which included paying them double to manufacture the carts, and you get an unfair comparison. We should be comparing apples to slightly better resolution apples. The oldest disc-based gaming system with a modern equivalent is the PlayStation. The original PlayStation was released in 1994 in Japan and 1995 in the West. At this time, new PS1 games regularly sold for about $60. Wait, that can't be right. Everyone brings up PlayStation 2, NES, 64, but never PlayStation 1. There has to be something. Colin said 1990 when he said NES. That was the last year of that generation, with the SNES being released in 1991. And he said 2005 for the PS2, with the PS3 being released a year later. Here's a chart from Ars Technica that, well, charts the price of disc-based games, adjusted for inflation. That initial drop doesn't match inflation. Let me convert those back to their original figures. Okay, so 1996 is $59.99. 1997 is $49.99. And 1998, $47.22. I'm gonna have to check these, aren't I? Especially in the early days, gaming prices were all over the place before they did settle at around $60 to $70 for cartridges. When the first PS1 games were released, this standard pricing persisted, but it wasn't long before the cheaper format's price dropped. In 1997, games were priced at around $40 to $50, and as the years aged from 1998 through to 1999, more and more games were set at $39.99, to the point where the vast majority of new releases released in late 1999 and early 2000, before the release of the PS2, were priced at $39.99. Okay, now let's convert that to 2021 dollars. Until 2018, the cheapest gaming software had been was $19.99. So, in 2017, when Colin said this, despite the name of his show, he was wrong. He was also wrong in 2013, and in 2021 when he tweeted this, because the $70 price point actually jumps it over 1999 prices, adjusted for inflation, putting it about level with 2005. Now, none of this factors in that, none of this factors in that some gamers are paying double face for their games. Whether it's season passes, microtransactions, or a gold, silver, platinum vigilante edition with iconic cap, gamers are paying more and more for the full experience, to the point where it's the equivalent of an NES game, adjusted for inflation. Secondly, the Sherlock to my Moriarty, Colin Moriarty. I should have made him Moriarty. Why did I make myself the bad guy? Duh. Colin brings up that consoles exist, like, in reality, and that they cost money. He's all over the place on this one. Like, I have no idea how he got to be so confident about this. Like, here's all of the box tables. They're called tables. Here's all the tables from his article. If you look at Nintendo consoles, the NES is the most expensive console, but the Wii U, the most recent console at the time, was the second most expensive. Over time, PlayStation consoles have decreased when adjusted for inflation, but Xbox has increased. So maybe it's that Colin's kind of a Sony fanboy, so he has a perception that consoles are getting cheaper? I don't know. Thing is, Cold EM doesn't bring up the last year of a console's generation like he did with software. And there's a logic to this. Consoles don't retail for the same price over their lifetime. Price drops and new console iterations change the recommended retail price. Okay, to illustrate this, here's a couple of examples. Take an early adopter. That's someone who pre-orders a console, who's getting it day one. They're going to pay launch price. And let's say that they don't have a preference for a particular console or a particular platform. They just want to buy the most powerful console. I do not want to explain why I had a haircut between then and now. For argument's sake, let's say PS1, Xbox, PS3, PS4, and Xbox Series X. Now, Xbox was the cheapest, closely followed by PS4. So 2013 was around about the cheapest in terms of hardware. Now take that same list of games, but imagine someone who's in the early majority, someone who waits 2-3 years to buy a console. For them, it's actually never been more expensive in terms of real inflation-adjusted money. Now, I could play this game all day, But I hope these examples have shown you that it's a little bit more complicated than some may make it out to be.
So, I wanted to take a second out because I feel like I was unfair to Colin. I did clip it out of context. This video is actually about, like, his whole video is about digitization and the way that games could come down in price, and they maybe should be, because, you know, costs associated with brick and mortar stores, things like manufacturing of like discs, transport, advertising. I mean, there's always advertising, but like in-store advertising. On the other side, there is usually a cost associated with selling on a platform. For Steam, it's about $30. I mean, not $30, 30%. 30 cents in a dollar is what I meant to say. Yeah, games aren't coming down based on the digitization of the industry because of 3 reasons that Colin points out in that video. They are the relationships between brick and mortar stores, inflation, which kind of specific to that point, but I think inflation folds in to his third point, which is corporate greed. Maybe inflation means that the prices aren't going to be coming down even when supply shortages stop, because corporate greed is there and it's going to want to keep prices high. So yeah, I just wanted to say the video around the statement that I targeted is good. Okay. Bye.
It took nearly 20 years for the real value of a game to drop below $19.99 pricing, with price jumps at the outset of a generation counteracting inflation. Now, the recent jump to $70 is too little to do the same, so game prices are trending down. Whether or not gaming is cheaper than ever, and I would suggest not, inflation is not a great reason for saying that they should cost more. So do games really need to cost more, like publishers claim?
And with rising development costs and inflation, how and why has the price not
You're
shifted?
the worst one. Like, where's this guy's arm? Like, is he, like, he's not, like, around her. It's, like, it's kind of, like, I don't know. I mean, rising development costs is a good point. If the wages of their employees have gone up...
Kate Cox from The Consumerist, a non-profit consumer affairs website.
Okay, go for it. Yeah, I wasn't in the middle of anything.
Kate Cox from The Consumerist, a non-profit consumer affairs website, detailed some of the practices that have become standard with video game sales in recent years. She explained that the reason most retailers in the US charge $59.99 for a new video game on release week is because it's a price point that comes from the publisher, and all the retailers that sell the new product agree to abide by it.
And that doesn't really tell us anything. Like, why do publishers set that price point? I guess it tells us why retailers don't increase their prices to compensate for inflation on their costs. If the relationship with a publisher is predicated on them selling a game for $60, they're not going to charge customers more. Which is why most specialty game stores are diversifying their product lines with things like pre-owned games and merchandise, where there are better profit margins.
Stores that choose not to abide by this price quickly find themselves out of favor with the publisher, risking future shipments. So if Big Game Store is keen on getting players in the door, they won't drop below the publisher's guidance.
What?
Publishers set the minimum price of $60 because it guarantees their cut will be substantial enough to support them, with more being made from extras such as collector's editions, DLC, and microtransactions.
If it's a minimum, why not just go up, right? Anything? No? It's fine. I mean, if you want me, I can come up with a couple of examples. Maybe it's the digital marketplace that's keeping it down. Maybe it's just general market competition. That's why they're the worst one. Like, where's the dad's arm? Put a pin in that stuff about collector's editions, microtransactions, and DLC. I will get back to it. But first I want to deal with the point I was making before I was cut off. Now, if wages have gone up, this can increase the demand side, so there's more money for people to buy things, so maybe the prices should go up. Wages have also increased on a studio level, leading to increasing costs for development, but we aren't seeing a corresponding increase in prices for games. Well, I'll get to the costs in a second, but Colin said something about wages. What was it? Future me. Do a thing.
Quote,
This isn't to say that salaries or hourly pay have kept up with inflation and the cost of living. It decidedly hasn't. End quote. This appears to be a somewhat caveat to what he's saying, that gaming is cheaper than ever. That if wages are falling relative to inflation and cost of living, it may not feel like gaming is cheaper. Really loves absolutes, doesn't he? It depends. It depends on what you're trying to compare. A lot of the articles on this topic reference the Pew Research Center's research into the US wages over the past 55 years. Not Colin's, though. His 1008 word article only has one reference. It's the first word, and it's to the Wikipedia page for inflation. I don't know what to do with that information. Research shows that when you adjust for inflation, wages were higher in the 1970s than they are today. And this is despite rising GDP over the years. And if you imagine the people of a country as being shareholders, except that their capital is labor, they should probably receive a share of the profits. And most of them haven't. What was I talking about? Point is, we're comparing video games. And nobody really talks about video games in 1964. Usually they start with the NES, sometimes the Atari, to be fair, but most of the time it's the NES. And I think that's where most people engaged with the gaming industry do start. It's the time that the industry was essentially rebooted after the collapse in 1983. The NES was released in 1985. So if we look at this period, statistically, the average person should have more disposable income. Median wages have actually increased even when adjusted for inflation. The median net personal income increased from $25,000 in 1985 to $28,000 in 1995, then nearly $31,000 in 2013 to over $35,000 in 2020. So arguably, salaries have kept up with inflation and cost of living in the modern age of video games. Before I move on, I just want to clarify, inflation is a measure of cost of living, but it's not perfect. Based on biases in elementary index functional form, commodity or outlet substitution, quality changes, and introduction of new goods, there is a general agreement among economists that inflation as calculated by CPI actually overstates the real change in cost of living. I don't know half of what that means, but I think I understand substitution bias. Now, this is a graph of the way that CPI overreports the actual change in cost of living. As the price of cellular telephones falls relative to the price of stamps, consumers will make more phone calls and write fewer letters. What? When was this written? 1995. Here's a more relevant example. Imagine the price of AAA games goes up by, let's say, $10. So, more people start buying indies or smaller titles because they're cheaper relatively. This change in consumer habits won't be reflected in inflation. This is because CPI is based on a fixed basket, and the changes to that basket naturally lag. Then there's the fact that these are nationwide figures, and cost of living can vary from state to state, see map. But even median wages might be misleading. Median is a middle point, where 50% of people are above it and 50% are below. In a normal distribution, mean, median, and mode are equal. Wages in the US are not distributed this way. Generally, on a national level, they skew lower. But if median wages are increasing, why does Colin perceive them not to be? And specific to video games, I might have an answer. Delving deep into this census data shows that the wage increases are mainly concentrated in one demographic: women. Hear me out. I promise I'm getting somewhere. Compare the 100-point increase in real GDP over this period to an overall increase in median wages for males over 15 of 14 points and an increase of 76 points for women. This is an index though, so don't take it as there being no gender pay gap or opportunity gap or however you want to phrase that particular discrepancy. In raw numbers, on average, men make more money than women in every age demographic. And the median wages for men between 25 and 64 are higher than any age group of women. The raise in median wages over this period could be attributed to the closing of that gap, perhaps due to the increasing share of women entering historically male-dominated fields, which, by no coincidence I'm sure, have higher earning potentials. Who knows? I mean, someone might. Anyway, The rise in median wages in the US does not appear to represent any general increase across the board, but rather a change in labour participation. Now to bring it back to video games. Check this. A majority of the most frequent game purchases in the US are males in their 30s. I know that might sound like a stereotype, but from what I can tell, that is the case. ESA's 2018 Essential Facts about the computer and video game industry, which is the most recent year that they revealed purchasing data, the average age of the most frequent game purchases was 36, with 39% female and 61% male. These guys have been collecting this data for years, since 1998 with the first Essential Facts, back when they were still called the Interactive Digital Software Association. But they can't call themselves that anymore, because Raid Shadow Legends exists. This is live, by the way. I'm playing it right now. Where is the interaction? I ask of you. I beg of you. Tell me. This bit's over now. Anyway, this seems to be the case back to 2011, when the average age was around 40, and back to 2015 for gender, where previously it was about 50-50. I can't explain this sudden change. Maybe they changed their questions, or the way it was interpreted, or maybe they sampled differently. Initially I thought that it might have been that more parents were buying games for their kids back then, because there was a larger discrepancy between the age of players and purchases, but it wouldn't be so drastic, so I don't know. And when they have released player habits by gender, there still exists some bias of young male gamers towards console gaming. To what extent? It's impossible to say from the numbers they release, because they seem to have only provided the highest share for each demographic. Now, if you want to just look at these quote-unquote key demographics, males in their 30s, you could argue that wages for the average US game purchases haven't gone up relative to inflation since 1985. Median wages for men between 25 and 54 have barely shifted from where they were 35 years ago, adjusted for inflation, and for a majority of that time it's been below that level, particularly during the years of 2009 to 2014 following the global financial crisis. The point that I'm hopefully making is that this is complex and nuanced. Have wages not kept up with inflation and cost of living, as it may differ from CPI? It depends. Although, I think I can say decidedly, as it relates to video games, there hasn't been a significant increase on the demand side to produce a convincing reason to increase the price of games. Yes, that feels good. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning, you know? The word decidedly followed by heavily qualified statements. Okay, last one, last reason. We're getting there. Costs. Seeing as we're comparing disc-based games, let's start with the 5th generation, which included the PS1. According to a presentation at the 2006 Game Developers Conference by Factor 5, Nintendo 64 games cost on average between $1 and $3 million US, with a study of the launch of the PS2 published in the Journal of Business Research suggesting development for the original PlayStation cost between $800K and $1.7 million. And these same sources gave the figures for the GameCube as between $3 and $6 million, and for the PS2 as $5 to $10 million, respectively. In 2008, then president of Nintendo of America and beloved meme personality Reggie Fils-Aimé said that Wii titles cost between $5 and $10 million to develop for, including marketing, and claimed that game development for its rivals to be between $20 and $50 million. Then my hard drive f***ed me, and I lost 50% of my footage. For the next generation PS4 and Xbox One, development costs for AAA games was estimated to be between $60 and $80 million by Huego Studios, the developers of I don't know any of that. Wait, there's a hyper-casual? Is that what that was? It wasn't live, by the way. I lied. Never trust me again. And that was probably true early on. However, Sean Layden, former head of PlayStation Worldwide Studios, seen here in Geography Teacher Cosplay, in a game lab, he and his new retirement bid said that most AAA games cost between $80 and $150 million to develop.
And that's before marketing.
Yeah, before marketing. Conventional wisdom seems to be that it should be about 75 to 100% of the development costs. Now, if you've been following along, which I hope you have, you'll have noticed that these numbers seem to keep getting bigger. So costs are increasing, but we aren't seeing a corresponding price hike for games. So if prices haven't gone up but costs have, these companies' operating margins should be in the toilet, right? Well, like we did with Oreo earlier, let's look at these companies' financial statements and track their operating margins. Let's see where we're standing. Ubisoft's has been pretty consistent since 1999. Nintendo did take a hit after the release of the Wii U in 2012, but they're back up around where they were. Square Enix dropped in 2006, but has remained steady around that position since. Take-Two jumps up and down, seemingly playing hopscotch with the break-even line. And Activision Blizzard has never been better. So what's the deal? Costs are up, prices are stagnant, but operating margins are doing fine. There's more money in the industry than there's ever been. Well, that's a lot of money. Where's it all going? I mean, it doesn't seem to be to the working conditions of developers or QA testers. Is it King? Pretty sure it's King. This is where the collector's editions, microtransactions, and DLC come back in. Gamers have demanded better graphics. It's the #1 reason for ballooning development costs. But they've also been resistant to price increases. So publishers have introduced additional monetization, collector's editions, microtransactions, XP boosts, cosmetics, loot boxes. You might hate them, and some can be manipulative and predatory. But they're allowing publishers to have their cake and eat it too. Those that are willing and able to pay more do. And not always, again, the manipulation, predatory stuff. And those that can't just pay the $60. Oh, and there's also economy of scale. If a studio can spread costs over more sales and more projects, the cost per sale goes down. Studios often work on multiple projects in part for this reason. You can offset common costs like IT and administration over multiple projects, thereby decreasing the per project cost. It's also a way of offsetting risk. One project might fail, but others can succeed. Okay, so I think I'm done. Am I done? I can go home? Gotta do a conclusion, don't I? Join me at the conclusion wall, where I bring all the premises together and I build a conclusion that's satisfying. So this is it. This is the conclusion wall. I'd write conclusion wall on it, but it is a rental. So is a house, actually. Yoshio Osaki, president and CEO of IDG Consulting, a video game research firm, told GamesIndustry.biz that publishers were exploring an increase to $70 in line with inflation. And I think gamers are susceptible to this idea, as for years we've been told that games are cheaper than ever and that we should be seeing a rise in the price of games to account for inflation. Inflation isn't some magic powder you can sprinkle on stuff to make it more expensive. It isn't Salt Bae. That is a reference that nobody should ever make ever again. It's old now. It's like 5 years old now. Inflation is a result of monetary policy and supply and demand in a market of limited material and labor that affects the cost through the supply chain. Matt Piscatella, an analyst for... Who are they? Matt Piscatella, an analyst for the MPD Group, on an episode of the Virtual Economy podcast, said that these arguments about rising inflation and development costs fall flat. Okay, so what it really comes down to, bottom line, what are gamers willing to pay for it? And publishers are not ignorant of this fact. Phil Spencer, head of Xbox and Industry Chad, in an interview with Washington Post said, "We can price things whatever we want to price them. But in the end, I know that the customer is in control of the price that they pay, and I trust that system." This was echoed by Capcom CFO Kenkichi Nomura in an interview with Bloomberg, where he said, "We believe game software's price should be determined by how much money consumers are willing to pay for the quality, not by how much money we spend to make that game." So what do these people think consumers are willing to pay? So Matt Piscatella on that Virtual Economy podcast said that gamers would be happy to pay the extra $10 and argued that companies can always come out. I'm tired of reading quotes. Matt can do this one. Take it away, Matt.
And you can always come out at a higher price day one because the day one buyer of a video game really wants to play that game, and they would likely pay a higher price if you asked them to. And you can always drop the price down in step tiers later. And you've been paying a premium for years to play a game on day one.
Sure.
This is no different.
I guess he's right. Unless you buy Nintendo games, games often come down in price after a few months. and there are regular sales if you want to wait for them. Now, I'm not opposed to this idea in theory. You know, I'm happy with the current paradigm that $60 gets you the base game. And if you want the full game, you have to pay for the extra DLC, season pass, whatever. I just don't buy them. But what I think about is, what if not enough people are willing to pay a premium price? Especially at a time when a lot of these games are becoming live services or relying on recurring revenue. Like, who blinks first? Games back in the 80s were like any emerging market, testing the proverbial waters, looking for that magic price point. You could be like Return of the Jedi selling for $80 and nobody buys it. Or you could be offering $5 hand jobs and get an influx of customers, just like your mum. Supply and demand applies to the sex industry as well. Like, it's an industry. It's a market like any other market in a capitalist system. I don't know what to tell you. Your mum doesn't understand economics. Pricing jumped around before settling at about $60 until the late 90s, where it dropped, at least for PS1, and then steadily rose back up to $60. Back when Robert Klingensmith, the president of video at Paramount in 1987, said that the magic price point for VHS cassettes of a movie was $19.95, he was referring to the maximum price that consumers wouldn't hesitate to purchase the film. Maybe games settled around $60 because that was the magic price point. Raising that price by just $10 could increase the number of consumers who are either priced out or hesitate and end up not purchasing the game, even when the price comes down, because they've moved on. But Colin was right.
It cannot be contested.
Not that. No, when he said vote... No, what happened to my voice? No, when he says vote with your wallets.
By speaking loud and clear, not only with our voices, but also with our wallets.
Yeah, thank you. If you don't want $70 games, don't buy them. Like Philly Spence said, the customer is in control of the price that they pay. The real point of all this is twofold. I'm a consumer, and what the heck, they're consumers. All of them. What are you doing? Why are you batting for the other team? This isn't some Pee-wee league where if they're short a player, we gift them one of ours. Like, what are you doing? And secondly, if people are saying that gaming is too expensive for them, I think it's pretty shitty to try and delegitimize that. Basically saying that they should be grateful that gaming is cheaper than ever, that they have nothing to complain about because somebody in the past had it worse. Look, I hate this form of gatekeeping. People are voicing an honest concern of their future ability to engage with a hobby that they love. Yes, gaming is expensive, often involving the purchase of a pricey console or a high-spec PC. But I want everyone who wants to have the best opportunity possible. And if that means that every game has a deluxe edition with iconic cap, well, so be it. We should be in this together. No gamer should be arguing against another that they have nothing to complain about when it comes to game pricing. Because technically, gaming isn't cheaper than ever, and inflation is irrelevant. Okay, I'll do it now!